Well, to talk more about that truce proposal, I'm very pleased to be joined now live by Gershon Baskin. He's a former Israeli hostage negotiator. He worked to help free the Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit, who was held in Gaza for 5 years. Good afternoon to you, sir. Thanks for joining us. Good to get your perspective on all of this. First of all, what do you make then of this Hamas proposal today, and how much of it do you think the Israeli government will be taking seriously?
I think there's room to maneuver here, and there's a possibility of reaching some agreement. There are red lines put by both sides here, and it's going to take the weight and the leverage of both the Qataris and the Egyptians on Hamas and on Israel. For Israel, the main problem of the deal proposed by Hamas is that it leaves Hamas in control of the Gaza Strip throughout the phases and at the end of the war, an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, and that's not acceptable to Israel, who set out on this war to dismantle Hamas's ability to govern the Gaza Strip and to serve as a military threat to Israel. Hamas is also demanding the release, even in the first stage, of 500 Palestinian prisoners who have murdered Israelis. There are 559 prisoners in Israeli prison who are serving life sentences for murdering Israelis, and another 130 of the Hamas fighters who were caught in Israel after October 7th. So this is also very difficult for Israel to swallow, certainly when they're not getting back all the hostages. And every day we're hearing of more hostages who have been killed. So it's there's an urgency here, but it's very difficult for both sides to move forward.
And I want to talk to you a bit more about the prisoner exchange itself in a moment. But first of all, let's talk a bit about the potential American pressure on Israel, because as we're talking, we're looking at live images right now of Antony Blinken, who's now sitting down with the Israeli President Isaac Herzog. We know he was also meeting the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today. Behind the scenes, is it your impression that Blinken will be pushing the Israeli leaders to take this deal quite seriously, even though some of it clearly isn't tenable to Israel? Or what do you think Blinken's message is going to be?
Well, I think it's clear that there is some space opening up between the Israelis and the American administration of President Biden. President Biden has been speaking more and more of his doctrine, as Thomas Friedman called it, in which we would see the establishment of a Palestinian state next to Israel and the recognition of that state by the United States and other OECD countries. Mr. Blinken wanted to meet privately with the Israeli Army Chief of Staff, and Mr. Netanyahu didn't allow that to happen. The only reason that I can think of that the Secretary of State of the United States would want to meet separately with the Israeli Chief of Staff is simply that he doesn't believe the messages that he's getting directly from Prime Minister Netanyahu. This is something unprecedented in U.S.-American relations, and I think it's an indication of a growing distance between the positions of the two sides. The Americans want this war to end. The Americans need to, the American administration, Biden, has lost a lot of support within his own political party, and the ticking clock of his American elections is moving forward, and he needs to consider that he needs to regain support within his own party if he wants to remain president.
Well, you say the Americans want this war to end. What about Netanyahu himself? Because we know that there are some prominent figures within his own cabinet who are pretty clear this war needs to go on come what may.
Right. I think Netanyahu himself is interested in prolonging the war, because as soon as there's a break in the war or an end to the war, Netanyahu is going to have to face a national commission of inquiry headed by a Supreme Court judge that's going to ask a lot of very difficult questions of why October 7th happened. How did Israel fail to protect itself? What led to the October 7th atrocities that enabled Hamas to gather so much power and military force to break through that body and kill so many Israelis? And this is the direct responsibility of Netanyahu. He cannot avoid taking responsibility, although he has tried. He will try and put the responsibility on the army, on the intelligence, onto everyone else except himself. But from public opinion polls, we have seen that he has lost more than 50% of his own base. The majority of Israelis no longer want him to be our prime minister.
And I wanted to ask you finally about your particular experience having worked to release the IDF soldier Gilad Shalit. Now, that was one Israeli soldier. He was released in the end for hundreds of Palestinians. We now have a far higher number of Israelis who are being held in Gaza, over 100. So in terms of this prisoner exchange, will Hamas demand an even higher number of people? Might we see some significant political Palestinian figures being released? What's your sense as to what we'll see?
Yes, most definitely. Hamas has let it be known that they want to empty the Israeli prisons from Palestinian prisoners. There are between 9,000 and 10,000 prisoners today in Israel. Only 25 or 30% of them are Hamas members. The others, even just from the beginning of the war, Israel has arrested around 5,000 people in the West Bank. They've taken out about 1,000 Hamas and other fighters from Gaza to be interrogated and determine whether or not they belong to Hamas or Islamic Jihad. So there's a large number of prisoners, and Hamas is going to demand the release of all of them before they release the last hostages.
Gershon Baskin, a former Israeli hostage negotiator, thank you very much indeed, sir, for your time and for your expertise on the programme.
Thank you.